where do you think Kansas sits with their transfer portal class, what they've done so far in December?
Yeah, you're sitting in a really good spot in that there aren't many positions I feel like that you look at and you feel like, man, this just hasn't been addressed.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible.
Pay heed, all who enter. Beware this podcast. That's right, this is a paid podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. First things first, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year to everyone tuning in, as we are excited about that, certainly, as well. The Chiefs play on Christmas Day, obviously, so if you're a Chiefs fan, it still could be a stressful Christmas Day for you. I know it probably will be for me as well for that. But yeah, certainly wishing well wishes to everybody over the next week or so, enjoying the holidays and so on and so forth. And Kansas football and Kansas basketball, I think, are probably both enjoying the holidays. A little bit of a combo episode here. We're going to talk a little bit of both, as KU football added some big transfer portal names we're going to get to, and also Kansas basketball wrapped up its non-conference slate with a big win against Brown. We'll start with Kansas football on the football side. As last we talked with Michael Swain of 24/7 Sports about what KU might be still looking for. I think still the top position that Kansas still was looking to add to was the receiver room. And boy, Kevin, did they add a big name over the weekend in Alabama transfer Emmanuel Henderson Jr. From Alabama. So that gives KU two former Alabama players committed in their transfer portal class. And obviously this was one at a huge position of need, a very significant get. How are you feeling about the state of KU's wide receiver room with their latest addition, Emmanuel Henderson?
Yeah, take them all, right? Like, if Alabama guys want to hit the portal, I think there is a home for those guys in Lawrence. But in all seriousness, Emmanuel Henderson is a really interesting guy, Nick, in that this is a guy who is one of the top running backs in the country coming out of high school, was ranked as the number 2 running back in the entire country in the 24/7 Sports Composite, the number 41 player nationally at any position in the 24/7 Sports Composite. And for those who aren't familiar, the composite, basically takes into account the rankings of all the different services. So you don't necessarily play favorites with one or another. So people felt like, generally speaking, this was a top 40 kid in the country coming out of high school playing running back. He was a great athlete in basketball, did a little bit of track as well. Went to Alabama as a running back, but pretty quickly flipped to wide receiver and played there as a true freshman, played there again as a sophomore. And then this past year, Nick, which obviously would be the most relevant part of it, he was their 4th most snapped wide receiver. And for a guy who's just in his 3rd year of playing wide receiver with the guys that Alabama had at that position, when you look at Ryan Williams, when you look at Jeremy Bernard and guys like that, it's really impressive to get on the field as much as he did. He played in some big games. One of his biggest catches came in Alabama's win against Georgia. And so there are going to be some people who say, oh, this guy had 4 catches this year. What's the fuss, basically? The fuss is that you're getting a guy who's a really high-level athlete who still has somehow, despite having experience in playing in big games, still has upside ahead of him. And as a guy that potentially, I think, Nick, and this is the exciting thing for him, could take a jump with more opportunity where he can step in and not be the 4th most snapped guy, not be competing with Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard and guys like that for catches, but potentially even being, if not the guy, then certainly one of the guys in this Kansas offense that they're going to try and feed the ball to.
Yeah, I think just sort of big picture wise, and I think the Emmanuel Henderson discussion fits into this, is that I think overall this transfer portal class so far for Kansas, they've done a really good job of balancing, getting some players that have proven production at the previous stop, and guys like Emmanuel Henderson, who maybe doesn't necessarily have the production, right? I mean, you look at his numbers and you think, oh, what's the big deal, right? But the upside is there, right? Like the explosive upside is certainly there for Kansas to tap into. And I think that's kind of really the challenge of the transfer portal is I think you definitely want to get guys that have proven production at the previous stop, But then, there is going to be plenty of opportunities to get guys like Henderson who maybe have a ton of talent, but didn't necessarily get all of the opportunities to display that at the previous stop, in this case for Henderson. So certainly this is a big get. I think it's a guy, again, with really high upside, maybe not as high of a floor as any other receivers they could get, but certainly somebody that could bring another level to the offense if you could sort of tap into that.
Yeah, friend of the show and KCSN teammate Ken Swanson sent me a message saying the pieces fit, and I think he's absolutely right about that. I think Henderson does have wide receiver 1 potential in this offense. You don't want to call him wide receiver 1 before you've seen it in practice, obviously, but you look at Levi Wentz, another guy that they got here recently. He's a big body contested catch guy, right? Can be that guy that can work the middle of the field in a way similar to what LJ Arnold was able to do. You take a look at Cam. He's a guy that is more your run after catch guy. You can throw him something, a 4-yard pass, a quick hitch, something like that, and he can accelerate, break a tackle, do things, with the ball in his hands. And so I do think that there are some good fits there. You add Doug Emilion, who's got now all of a sudden a decent amount of experience in the system, good route runner, good blocker. You add him to that mix. Keaton Kubeka, a guy, Nick, that we saw last spring and saw a little bit this fall, is a guy that is a big body guy that can make some contested catches, can do some things. I think runs probably a little bit better than maybe people realize. And so the pieces there are starting to fit, and you look at that freshman class as well. I'm not saying I'm expecting any of those guys to hop right into the starting lineup, but you have some different kinds of guys there where if you needed somebody, hey, we don't really have a jet sweep guy that we love. Well, maybe that's Bryson Hayes. Or maybe it's, hey, we'd like to have a guy that we could count on to, go make a body control catch on a slant route. That's Jaden Nickens. And so they've got all of a sudden different types of guys. In addition to having guys who are pretty good, they have guys who fit and guys who can play different roles where they can kind of look at that sideline and say, hey, what do we need on this play? And they probably have a guy who fills that need.
Kansas also added, who is actually their highest rated transfer. If you look at the transfer ratings on 247 Sports, that's at the tight end position on the offensive side of the ball with Keon Burnett, a transfer from Arizona, coming in. And you look at the tight end room for Kansas, right? I mean, another position where they, everyone immediately jumps to the receiver position, obviously, when you think about guys lost, but you've lost your 2 most productive tight ends from this past season as well at the tight end position also, as well, with Jared Casey and Trevor Cardell moving on. You hope that Deshaun Hanukkah should be able to come back, I think, and be, in that discussion. But beyond that, I think Leighton Kira, I believe, still has a year of eligibility left. But then after that, you're thinking about some of the young guys he brought in, like Jaden Ham and whatnot. So Burnett becomes a guy that can step into that room and really compete as well. Really strong get. And again, he is actually, by 247 Sports' rankings, their highest rated transfer that Kansas has signed so far this transfer portal cycle. Kevin, let's zoom out and take a look at this from sort of a big picture perspective right now. There is a dead period happening right now, which has just started on Monday, the 23rd, which, if you're unfamiliar with what that means, essentially a dead period means no more campus visits, no more visits, right? So you're not probably going to be seeing anybody. You won't see anybody on campus or anything like that. This is an opportunity for coaching staffs to sort of have their own vacations essentially during this time period. But what it also means is that you still will see players enter the portal, and the recruiting doesn't stop. As you know, Kevin, it's a 24/7, 365 thing, but it might slow down a little bit in terms of commitments for Kansas over the course of this dead period. So heading into this dead period at this time, before we get into January, where do you think Kansas sits with their transfer portal class, what they've done so far in December?
Yeah, you're sitting in a really good spot in that there aren't many positions, I feel like, that you look at and you feel like, man, this just hasn't been addressed. And so is Kansas potentially going to take another receiver? Yeah, I think that's possible. Are they possibly going to take another linebacker? Yeah, I think that's something. The one position I would say, if you really look at it and say, hey, what could they use more of? Maybe it's another strong side end after, they brought in Caleb Redd. But at the same time, you kind of done some things at each position. Maybe you could use another safety. You know, there are spots where they could maybe still use a guy, but when you look at where they were entering the transfer portal from an offensive line standpoint, where, hey, you're not just losing multiple seniors here, but also Logan Brown's going into the NFL. You're losing, 3 starters, and even if you wanted to be kind of include Calvin Clements in that group because of how much he's played, 3 of your top 6 offensive linemen you have to replace. And if you looked at the linebacker position, obviously pretty much starting over at those spots. At wide receiver, absolutely starting over after losing your top 4 guys. And so I think that's the really encouraging thing for me with this, Nick, is it's not that they've been perfect. It's not that they've landed every single top target that they've gone after. But even now, heading into the dead period, you feel like what they have to do now is less, filling in giant gaps, and it's more kind of smoothing over the level of what you just built. And so there are a few positions you want to see, guys. There are a few, highly touted guys that are still out there that Kansas would maybe like to bring in. And so this is a class that could get, another really exciting guy at some point. Remember, obviously, they didn't add By Job until the summer last year. And By Job was one of their bigger transfer gets in terms of the national perception, I guess, when he came in. And By Job is a guy that has a chance to have a big year this year. But no, that's kind of my takeaway from it is all of those giant holes that we saw have been mostly filled in. You can still add another player here or there, but there's nothing where it's like, hey, if the game kicks off tomorrow and Jalen Daniels throws a pass to the outside, like, is there anybody there to catch it? How about you, Nick? Like, what stands out to you on what's been done so far?
Man, I honestly feel like to this point, this has been about as good as you could ask for. I think if you're Kansas, right? To your point, you probably didn't get every guy maybe that you wanted if you're Kansas. You think about like an Aziz Johnson who ends up going to North Carolina at wide receiver, or Malachi Williams who ends up going to Boise State at the defenseman.
I loved Young, the cornerback out of Cincinnati, would have been like natural.
Jordan Young. Yeah. So, but listen, that's life recruiting, right? You don't get every guy you want to get anyways. But I think beyond that, like I said, it's been about as good as you could ask for if you're Kansas, because it seems like you have managed to get just some bodies into the business rooms where you needed to just add some guys. And then beyond that, I kind of touched on it already, but just that balance of, I think Kansas did a really good job of bringing in some guys that you feel like could step in and start, if there was a game played tomorrow. And you also brought in some guys that have a really high upside that are maybe a bit more of a project type player, but can really, really add and elevate the ceiling of the team as well. And so I think that's really good to see when you have that balance of players. And look, I think also beyond that, the bottom line is I don't think Kansas is even remotely close to being done. Players can still enter the portal, by the way, so it's possible you could still see more guys enter the portal that Kansas might be interested in as well. So this thing is a long ways from being wrapped up. But again, I think when you look at what Kansas has done so far, to me, to this point, sitting here 2 days before Christmas, a day before Christmas, I think it's gone about as good as you could ask for if you're Kansas.
One of the biggest transfer gets, maybe, Nick, Daniel Highshaw not hitting the portal, at least.
That's right.
At this point.
Daniel Highshaw seemingly returning to the team for KU, which is very significant when you consider they were going to be they lose Savion Norrison, but now with Highshaw coming back, that could be very significant as well.
A guy that I think both of us feel like could run for 1,000 yards with more opportunities, and so,
for sure.
Yeah, if Kansas is able to have that backfield of Jalen Daniels and Daniel Highshaw behind the offensive line that they have the potential to build out this year, looks like the offense could be pretty good once again.
Oh yeah, your 2 biggest transfer portal gets on offense, in quotes, transfer portal gets, are probably Daniel Highshaw and Jalen Daniels. I mean, let's be honest, Jalen Daniels coming back also was really good. So you know what else is really good, Kevin? That's some home field apparel.
Oh, I love home field.
You can go to homefieldapparel.com and use promo code PAID24, 15% off your first order. I'm rocking the Pay Heed shirt, actually, as well. So you can rep that from KU or many more. You're probably going to have a hard time getting it shipped into you before Christmas since it's Christmas Eve, but you can still get some excellent gear for yourself for the holidays or for a family member or friend. They've also got 130 other schools to shop from as well over at homefieldapparel.com. That's promo code PAYHEED24 for 15% off your first order. We're going to transition into some KU basketball talk coming up next.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your number one source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. If you're watching us on YouTube at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN, be sure to like, subscribe, drop a comment, share your thoughts. If you're listening on the audio side on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your audio as well. And you can leave us a 5-star rating and review also to help spread the word about us on the show here on KCSN. And thanks so much to everybody that's tuning in. Obviously, it is Christmas Eve, Christmas, if you're listening to this. So, if you're giving us some time, then maybe it's a chance to get away from some of your family members in some cases. But regardless,
we'll bring them into the fold. Introduce them to Pay Heed.
That's a great idea, actually.
There is nothing better to talk about at Christmas dinner than say, let's talk about what Nick and Kevin said on Pay Heed.
Yeah, let's talk about Kansas football and Kansas basketball. That's my type of Christmas dinner right there.
Yeah.
Let's shift over to some Kansas basketball talk here, Kevin. They wrapped up their non-conference play with a very big win over Brown, 87-53 out on Fieldhouse over the weekend on Sunday afternoon. Kevin, it was a really weird weekend because typically it's KU basketball on Saturday, Chiefs on Sunday, and then it was Chiefs Saturday, KU basketball Sunday. It was like, whoa, I was like really thrown off, but we got through it. Kansas defeats Brown 87-53. Another huge game from Zeke Mayo. Kevin, it feels like after that really bad week with consecutive true road losses against Creighton and Missouri, it just feels like on its face that Kansas has seemingly stabilized a little bit at the end of non-conference play, which is significant with conference play starting on New Year's Eve.
Yeah, I would agree. I think coming out of that week, you did feel like it was kind of just a bad week, right? Like the Creighton game, a lot of things went wrong. Everything went wrong in the first half against Missouri. We've talked about the fact that you never take moral victories away from a loss, especially to a rival, but the way that they defended it in that second half and were able to come back and nearly come back all the way against Missouri kind of showed that I think they were finding something along the way, and they've been really good since then. And Nick, in that game against Brown, you put up 1.24 points per possession, you give up 0.76 points per possession. Zeke Mayo goes for 25 points, and yet I almost feel like the most encouraging number from that game is that no single starter played 30 minutes in that. And you can obviously attribute some of that to the score line, when you have walk-ons getting in and things like that. But I also think, too, one of the big numbers was a 1-4 next to the minutes played by Shaq Moore. And so when you look at Shaq Moore starting to get into more of a rhythm, I thought he played pretty well, especially for a guy who hasn't played a whole lot this year. I think, AJ Storr is a guy that may be looking like, hey, maybe there's a little bit more comfort coming. He's not there yet, but at the same time, he got 20 minutes in that game, which the starters were all, I think, between, 20 and 29 minutes or so. Rylan Griffin played 15. So AJ,
he left the game at one point with it.
Yeah, with a face or that thing. But at the same time, I do think that that's an encouraging thing to be getting Shaq Moore back before the break and getting some confidence in him being there. Because we've talked on the show, Nick, we said it before the season even started, there's a lot of value there in him being able to keep Miles off of DeJuan Harris's legs, but also the ability to allow DeJuan Harris to play the way that makes DeJuan Harris the most effective. And that's, being a defensive pest, really he's not a tall point guard, but he has tremendous length for his height and his ability to get those arms out into passing lanes and not worry about, hey, if I pick up a whistle or two, we may lose the game if I have to go to the bench or I may have to really tone things down. Now you can put in Shaq Moore, who's, a reported psycho on the defensive end. And so when you add that extra element, it may not sound like much, and it does feel like we're talking a lot about an 8th or 9th guy in a rotation. But I think the way that he fits that rotation makes him kind of an intriguing, mid-season ad, if you will, for this team. The other thing is we've seen it in some of Kansas's struggles this year, Nick, that they've had one perimeter defender not enough, right? Whether it was North Carolina, whether it was the Creighton game, which I believe Rylan Griffin missed. It feels like there have been times where it's like, man, if we had one more perimeter defender in that game, things would have gone a little bit differently. And getting Shaq Moore back, where he can fill that specific role as well as backup point guard, I think should be pretty big. What do you think, too? Something that I thought was good. It was good to see Flory, I think, sort of that way. What did you think about the Brown game and kind of what it portends as far as heading into the future?
Yeah, I mean, look, the two biggest players that I had highlighted that I wanted to watch in this game was Shaq Moore and AJ Storr. Yeah. Right. And I don't think either one of them really disappointed. I mean, and also I do want to give a shout out real quick to Flory Budunga for the alley-oop from Shaq Moore off the backboard, which was a pretty cool moment there.
Did I see that Shaq Moore said that he heard Flory yelling out backboard as he was trailing? Backboard. If so, that, stamp that guy's legend a little bit bigger if he's trailing like that and is trying to let him know, like, hey, throw it up for me.
It wouldn't shock me considering the athleticism that Flory possesses if he wasn't, trying to call that out. But yeah, it was a pretty sick play to say the least at that point in the game. But yeah, I think, you kind of talked about Shaq Moore there. The part that I would add is just that I agree with you in that I think he's a much more significant addition than maybe you might look at the surface, right? Yeah. I think if you're just box score watching, you might think, okay, adding a guy who's going to be playing like 10 to 12 minutes a game and probably only scoring like a handful of points, like what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that Shaq Moore, I think, is an absolute bulldog of a defender and a player that brings an extra level of toughness to Kansas, and sort of that's, I guess, for lack of a better term, that second wave of guys, right? Basically, your second wave of guys. And then to your point, right, it keeps DeJuan Harris fresh, and allows him to maybe play a little bit more the way he wants to play without having to worry about being out there 35 minutes a game. So, yeah, I think Shaq Moore could end up being a very significant addition to this team down the stretch, because I think he does bring a lot of those aspects that KU needs, especially defensively on the perimeter, like you highlighted. And then with AJ Storr, I mean, look, we've been talking about it for the past 2 months, right? Like AJ Storr is probably that player that has the potential to elevate Kansas to its highest ceiling, possibly, if he can figure it out. And, I kind of talked about this, and I've been talking about this last week, but I think the ball is kind of in AJ Storr's court at this point. Like, we talked about it in our previous show, like Bill Self's not going to change the way he's coaching or his philosophy for any player. And so it's kind of up to AJ Storr to just sort of to make it work and to prove that, he can do the things that Bill Self wants him to do. Bill Self has talked about AJ Storr being the type of guy that can really help Kansas in terms of getting the free throw line, right? In terms of drawing fouls. And he did do some of that against Brown, by the way, which was nice to see. So, yeah, those are the two guys that I was most interested in watching. I think Shaq Moore was as advertised, right? Like, I think if you could get what Shaq Moore gave you on a nightly basis, 10 to 15 minutes, he ends up 1 of 2 from the floor, scores 5 points, 2 assists, or 1 assist, actually. That's pretty good, I think. That's pretty standard what you're probably going to see from him.
2 blocks. Had 2 blocks.
Yeah.
In a steal there too. But I'm interested to get your AJ Storr thoughts too, because AJ didn't necessarily, hit shots in that game, but he, like you said, he did attack a little more. He did get to the free throw line 4 times in 20 minutes. I think the other thing, Nick, is him grabbing 5 rebounds, if AJ Storr grabs 10 rebounds per 40 minutes, I think Bill Self would be pretty happy with those rebounding numbers. It's the sort of thing we've talked about, like the defensive flashes, and he's done some good things defensively here and there. If AJ Storr defends and he gets on the glass to a level like that, it's hard to have him out there if he's playing 20 to 25 minutes and grabbing 1 rebound. But when you look at what he did against Brown, where he grabbed 5 rebounds and got to the free throw line 4 times in 20 minutes, yeah, he missed some shots, but I kind of feel like that's almost the formula for him to have success this year.
Hunter Dickinson, by the way, Kevin, has quietly been putting together a really, really solid non-conference, put together a non-conference run. We'll see how he does in conference play. 15 points and 13 rebounds for him against Brown as well. And then, of course, Zeke Mayo, who, you and I think, are both in lockstep on this. It seems like at this point, when Kansas needs a bucket, there's 2 guys they're looking to. It's either Hunter Dickinson or Zeke Mayo. He looks phenomenal. You hope that I don't want to sort of be the Debbie Downer here, Kevin, but, I just still have flashbacks to those 2 true road games where Zeke Mayo was a bit timid and Kansas really struggled. You want to see what Kansas did at Allen Fieldhouse and take that and apply it on the road also. So that'll be the real big challenge for them, I think, coming up in conference play as well. But all in all, I mean, I think Bill Self in his postgame said that he would rate KU's non-conference slate as a B-. That's probably fairly accurate, I guess,
yeah.
Right? Like, you lose to Missouri, so I think that automatically bumps you down at least a letter grade, I would think. And then the Creighton game was tough, but we talked about it after those 2 losses. You can't win a national championship in November, right? Or December. So you can afford to have a bad week basically in December. I don't know you can necessarily afford to have a bad week like that in February. So that's what you want to try to avoid. But if you learn from it and you become a better team because of it, which I think it seems like Kansas maybe has, I guess. Well, that theory will really be put to the test whenever they do go back on for a true road game in conference play, which, by the way, Kevin, their early slate of conference play, they start with the game against West Virginia, then they go at UCF, which, by the way, at that game at UCF, remember, Kansas lost there at UCF. But then you look at the next stretch after that, they have back-to-back games at Cincinnati and at Iowa State, followed by a game against Kansas State that's at Allen Fieldhouse. That 3-game stretch early in conference play is probably going to tell you quite a bit more about where this team's at when they get there.
Yeah, especially since a game like Cincinnati doesn't just tell you if you're good enough, it tells you if you're tough enough. When you look at the way that team plays and it being on the road, to your point with going to Cincinnati and then to Iowa State, if you have another bad week basically on back-to-back road games like Kansas did before, you could look at that stretch later and say that's the stretch that lost Kansas the Big 12 title. And that seems like a lot to say about 2 games, but let's be honest, you're not winning every single other game on your schedule. And so you need to find a way probably to pull out at least one, if not both of those games in order to stay on pace. It would really hurt to lose both of those. And so I do think it's so cliche, but there are no games off. Once you get to conference play, there's not a week that you can really take off and just sort of, half-ass it or whatever. You need to show up on a really regular basis. And to our conversation earlier, that's where guys like Shaq Moore and AJ Storr, I think, are going to become really important. Is your offense struggling and AJ Storr kind of breaks you out of that offensive struggle because he gets to the basket and gets to the free throw line? Are you in a spot where, man, we're being out toughed right now, and Shaq Moore comes into the game and gives you some of that bulldog toughness, that defense, and helps you turn things around? You don't win a conference title with 5 players. And when you look at, we've talked about this.
I hate to cut you off, but that's what Kansas basically tried to that last year. It did not work.
Yeah, in fairness, Kevin McCullough was just incredibly injured and all of those things.
Yeah.
But you look back, like we've talked about this on the show before. You look back at like 2022, people will forget about it now, but with Remy Martin being hurt, like Joseph Yesufu played a big role in them winning a Big 12 title that year. And you know, by the time the NCAA tournament came around with what the rotation was and everything, Yesufu wasn't necessarily a huge part of them winning the national championship in terms of the NCAA tournament games. But Nick, they wouldn't have been in a spot to get a 1 seed, to have the path that they had, all of those different things, if Yesufu didn't step in such a key spot like that. You have to have that depth and be able to look down the bench and rely on guys 7, 8, 9, because that's what you need to win a conference title, especially in a conference as deep as the Big 12 is.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think when you look at the conference slate overall, you trust that KU's probably going to, you know, run the table at home, right? And if you do that, you really only have to win 3 or 4 road games probably. I mean, I think 13-7 or 14-6 is probably going to be close to good enough to be a top team in the conference, right?
Yep.
So, you know, as you take care of business at home, then you're talking about, okay, you got a game at Iowa State. You go at Baylor in February. You obviously got to go play at K-State, even though as terrible as K-State has been, obviously that's their Super Bowl. That's the only game they care about. And you got to go at BYU, you know, then you finish the year going at Houston. So, like, there are plenty of road games on the schedule that sort of raise red flags for you, but you don't have to win all of them. You know, just win a few of them, and you're probably going to be in pretty good shape to have a conversation for the Big 12 title. So, Kevin, any other final thoughts here before we get out of here?
No, I think it's like you said, like Bill Self said, it wasn't a perfect non-conference slate, but at the same time, it wasn't a bad one either. And you got to see some positive indicators. I still think, and I said this before, again, you don't take moral victories out of losing to Missouri, but I do think last year's team would have gotten absolutely splashed by Missouri after falling behind like that. I'm not sure that they had it in them to come back the way that this year's team did. That's something that I'm going to be interested to see moving forward, is whether or not that toughness can hold up in really rough spots in the Big 12. You saw a lot of that toughness in a win, too, when you wind up beating Duke with Hunter Dickinson missing a lot of that game after getting ejected. And so, Nick, I do think that this team has a lot of mental toughness. They rebounded from the bad week. They're going into the break, you know, on a high note. I think this is a team to be seriously considered for a Big 12 title, if not a national title, depending on the road that they get in March.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. I think certainly they've stabilized some things from that week they had in December, and now you go into Christmas, you go into the new year, and in the start of conference play, feeling pretty confident about where this team is at, I think, going forward. So we'll see how things play out. But certainly I'm sure they're going to enjoy their Christmas. We're going to enjoy our Christmas. Hopefully you all enjoy your Christmases as well, and New Year's and so on and so forth with family or whatever, and however the situation may be. But as always, thanks much for listening. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like. You can subscribe to the channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. We are getting very close to 500 subscribers on YouTube, so thanks so much for subscribing there. And also, you can get us anywhere you listen to your audio as well, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever it may be. Subscribe there to make sure you get all the latest, as we're going to be chronicling this Kansas basketball team and, of course, Kansas football as well through the spring with the transfer portal and plenty more as well here on the paid podcast. So until then, he's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. Once again, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays, and we'll talk to you again very soon. See ya.